Hey, everybody. We are back with another great episode of So You're Ready to Date. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that is probably a little bit nerve-wracking for a lot of people. It is, how do you know when the time is right to introduce your significant other to your family? You've been dating for a while now. Hopefully we've made it through the first couple of months and you've had a few dates and you're feeling pretty comfortable with things. And all of a sudden you're wondering, is the time right? Maybe you have a wedding coming up and you need a date, or maybe you do family dinners every week and they keep asking you when you're going to bring the new person that you're dating over. And so today we're just kind of going to talk about our experiences with that and kind of where to go with it.
Yeah. So this is, again, one of those topics where you don't want to set out hard and fast rules. So I think that's where sometimes you maybe introduce people too fast, or maybe you take too long. So this is always going to be about when it feels right for you and your relationship. It's not like you have to be, okay, it's 3 months, I have to introduce them. It's been, 12 dates, whatever. There's no like hard and fast, like this is the timeline you have to do it. So we're just going to kind of talk about not only our experiences, but kind of how our thoughts are on introducing the new person to the really important people in our lives.
Right. And so I've had a few experiences with that, and I want to throw out a couple of things for consideration. If you are a single parent, the time might be different to introduce your significant other to your grown-up family versus your kids, or vice versa. And it also may be different based on a lot of different factors. So just because we would have some standard thoughts on it doesn't necessarily mean that that's right for you. Remember, our advice is always, or our opinions, our advice, it's always just opinions. Our opinions are based on our personal experiences, and we are telling you that you need to do what's right for you. And given that, I also want to throw out a disclaimer, something to keep in mind, that a lot of new relationships don't make it past the 4-month mark. 4 months is a good amount of time for you to really see some of the true colors of the person that you're with. And it's a really good time for you to evaluate how you're feeling. So if you're a little bit more conservative and want to wait a little bit longer, or are thinking about some of the things that we're talking about, just know that 4-month mark is pretty standard. If you make it past that 4-month mark, you may have something solid going on, because a lot of those new relationships don't make it past that mark.
So there you go. You have at least a little guideline as like, okay, let's give it this amount of time to see if I still like him. I mean, if I still want him to stick around, if I still see some sort of potential here. So yeah, don't feel like you have to rush yourself to get to this point, because people in your life might be bugging you about that. I know that that's hard to sometimes set that boundary with those people who are nearest and dearest to us, but sometimes it's about saying, hey, I'm kind of enjoying seeing where this goes. When it feels like something more solid, I will 100% make sure to introduce him to you, or her, or whoever you happen to be dating. But I think that's probably where your biggest fight might be, is like, grandma really wants to meet so-and-so that you have been talking about, or, mom has been bugging you again because so-and-so just got engaged and why aren't you? So I understand that there's some family pressure that comes with a new relationship and wanting to introduce them to your family, but don't let that timeline be rushed by anybody but the two of you inside that relationship.
And conversely, just because they're ready doesn't necessarily mean that you're ready to introduce them to your family, just because they're ready to introduce you to theirs. Or just because you're ready to introduce somebody to your family doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be ready to introduce you to theirs. Family dynamics are very different, and it's probably something that has come up and that you've talked about, especially if you're making it to a point where you're considering that. But my personal experience with my current relationship, I was ready to introduce him to my family much sooner than he was ready to introduce me to his family, just because our family dynamics are very different. And we ended up out on a weekend night, and there was a function happening that my family happened to be at. And I really wanted to go, but I didn't want to cancel the date. So in my case, he casually met my family when we showed up to an event that all of my family was at, and he happened to be along for the ride. So sometimes things come up that change your plans too.
Right. Yeah. And it's a good point that you brought up that like, just because you might be ready doesn't mean they are ready to introduce them. And to two, not read too much into it. I think there's this tendency like, well, if they're not ready when I am, does that mean he or she is ashamed of me? Are they ashamed of this? And I'm like, no, here's where hopefully you're having those good communications, that good conversation that's like, I'd love to meet your family. My family is just maybe slightly less of a dynamic that I'm ready to dig into with you, but give me some time. I'll let you know when I'm ready. Having those kind of boundaries within your little relationship, I think is helpful. And being clear and saying like, it's not that I don't want to, it's that when I'm ready, I will let you know. For me, that would take a huge amount of pressure off of the fact of like, do I have to keep checking in on this? Should I keep asking them? Should I keep checking to see, are we ready? No, let it happen in the time it's meant to happen.
And believe them. Believe what they tell you. When they tell you that they're not ready for you to meet their family because of their family and not because of you, believe them. If you are in a relationship, relationships are built on trust. And if you don't believe what they say and you don't trust what they're telling you and that they're being honest with you about the way they're feeling about their family, then maybe you need to evaluate the stability and the longevity of your relationship anyway, because relationships, good, solid relationships are going to be founded on trust.
Right. And I do think like friends and family are two very different like social groups. So they may be way earlier interested in introducing you to friends than they are to their family for, a lot of the reasons that we've already talked about. So just kind of being patient with the fact that, if this is going to be a good, solid thing, there's no rush. Hopefully you'll have plenty of time to get to know family, but letting it happen at a pace that they feel comfortable about and not forced into, I think will give you a better outcome overall.
Yes, I agree. And, one of my very early relationships, I had lived in a small town. Everybody knew everybody. So I knew who this person's parents were. I already knew them. I'd probably even talked to them at one point in time. I knew their grandparents. I knew where their grandparents worked. I talked to their grandparents. So that wasn't the problem. It wasn't that I didn't know, but it's that the family dynamic was so hard for him that he didn't want to introduce me to his family, not because of me, but because of the way that he fit into his family or felt like he fit into his family. So that one took a really long time for that to come together and to meet the family. Whereas meeting my family, again, was a lot faster, something that happened, but that was also a lot slower than my most recent relationship. So just because you introduce one relationship to your family very early doesn't mean that your next relationship is going to move at the same pace. So again, taking that pressure off and letting things happen. And think about how quickly you even tell your family that you're in a new relationship. Do they even know? Is it somebody that you've been talking about before you're ready to introduce them? Are you open to talking about a new relationship right away when you start dating them? That's probably a sign that you may feel a little bit more comfortable to introduce somebody a little bit earlier rather than later in the relationship. So just weighing all of those things, but knowing that there's no pressure. If you don't want to introduce them to your family, you probably don't have to.
Well, that's a fair point to bring up too, is like my sister and a few of my best friends knew that I was dating this guy way before like my dad and the aunts and uncles that I'm closest to even knew that I was dating anybody. So there's that first step of like, how do I bring this up in casual conversation? Like, yeah, I've been out on a few dates with this guy. It seems like it's fairly promising. But speaking as somebody who has never brought anybody home, who has never introduced anybody, and it has, more to do with, deeper seated issues that we're not going to get into here today, but it's a thing. But for any of you out there listening, it doesn't necessarily mean anything if you've never let that relationship get to a point where you've introduced them to the family. There's a lot of work that goes into feeling comfortable and confident enough in yourself and inside this relationship before you want to add in those extra, emotions, the extra people, the kind of complications that can come with family. So just knowing that maybe your baby step is telling that best friend that, hey, I've been on 2 dates with this guy. I really like him. So starting in those small moments and to those people that you really truly trust, who are not going to pressure you or make a big deal out of anything, to start introducing the idea that you're seeing this person and that it might be a thing later on.
Exactly. And also keep in mind distance. Distance is a thing. I know when I got into my current relationship, his family is spread all over the place. And not one of the first, but I have still only met, we've been together for over 5 years now, or right at 5 years. And I have still only met a small handful of his family. And there's still more. And it's not that he is ashamed of me by any stretch of the imagination, but he's got a very large family and he hasn't seen his family in that time. And in some of those interactions, he really doesn't, like, we haven't been to where his family is and his family hasn't been here. And so it's not like it's a big deal. And maybe I won't ever meet some of those family members, some of his brothers and sisters, or even his mom.
I think that's, a really important point to make too, because, I've been seeing and dating this guy whose family lives on a complete other continent. So the possibility that we will probably ever meet in person is very rare if we make it past whatever point we end up making it past. But those are some really real conversations that it doesn't necessarily mean anything about you, but if they're not close to those particular parts of their family, if logistically and, where they are located doesn't make sense for you to go and visit them, that there may be some real barriers to why you are or not meeting or are not meeting particular members of their family. But again, hopefully this is not about you trying to read into what they are or not saying. It's having these conversations about, hey, do you want me to meet this part of the family? And maybe they're like, no, I don't really get along with this part of the family. I don't see them that much. I don't really feel the need to introduce something that I really like and cherish to those people. And that could be simple as that.
And let's flip the script on that too. How you're feeling about introducing somebody to your family, is that something that you're clearly communicating? Again, we were talking about how you need to trust what your partner tells you when they're telling you why they may not be ready to introduce you to their family, especially if that has nothing to do with you. So conversely, if you're not ready to introduce your significant other to your family, that's fine. Don't do it until you're ready. But I think that's a conversation that you should probably have with your significant other, opening up those lines of communication and giving them the opportunity to build that trust and to be transparent on your side and letting them trust the information that you're giving and knowing what's best for your family dynamic.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think another important piece of that is if you have brought this up to your significant other and they're like, I'm not ready to meet your family yet, we need to respect that as well. I mean, we've talked about feeling like we're in this place and hopefully you're having these conversations and you're both ready, but there's also that very real possibility that you bring it up and they're like, oh, this was a theoretical thing that someday I was going to meet the family, and now it's very real. So always making sure that we're giving both people in that relationship the space to say, I understand your family's important. I just don't feel comfortable or secure enough or whatever reason. And they don't really need to provide too much of a reason necessarily of why they may not be comfortable meeting your family yet. But maybe having that conversation, say, hey, let me know when you're feeling ready because I'm ready to introduce you. And so that you have this ongoing dialogue. So, we want to make sure that we're being cautious and kind to people who maybe aren't in that space yet to want to meet your friends and family.
Right. Because that can be a thing too. That can be an overwhelming experience for someone, especially if that's somebody that is now your significant other that you are now dating is not somebody who has dated a lot. Maybe they've only had one relationship their whole life. Maybe they've never had a relationship before. Maybe they're a very shy person. Maybe they're a little bit insecure with themselves. And so just because they're not ready to meet your family, if you're ready to introduce them, but they're still not ready, I like how you said that, Lisa. Make sure that you're talking that out, because that is a reflection on how they're feeling inside, and may not be a reflection of how they're feeling about the relationship, but how they're feeling personally in the grand scheme of things, because that can be just very nerve-wracking in and of itself.
I think there's always that little point of like, what have they said to their family about me? You know, and hopefully you've been saying like good things about this other person. But yeah, it can be daunting to step into that dynamic that's already very well established as this newcomer. And if you know you're like me and not always great at meeting new people and being in those new situations, it may take a little bit of warming up. It may take a little bit of practice to get yourself to that space. And maybe it's not about, you know, like throwing them into the deep end. You're like, hey, I'm going over to my mom and dad's for dinner, and it's just going to be the four of us. So maybe it's those incremental steps of introducing them slowly to your family, one person or a couple people at a time, as opposed to bringing them over on Thanksgiving when everybody and your cousins and their dogs and everybody is there, and it can be very overwhelming. So taking that into consideration too.
You said something that I kind of want to go back to, and I might be getting on a little bit of a soapbox here or stepping off to the side of what this is, but mind your words. When you are talking to your family, and especially your friends, right? Your best friend, you're going to call and you're going to dish, and you're going to talk about the guy that you're dating, and you're probably, or the girl that you're dating, and you're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And when you are talking about the bad and the ugly, be careful. You want your friends to like your significant other. A lot of times we feel like when we have a place to go vent, when we have a place to go talk about our frustrations, that makes us feel better. But those are the people that are supporting us and surrounding us. And if all they hear about what you're saying is the negative things about the guy that you're dating, or the girl that you're dating, or the person that you're seeing, if all they're hearing is this negative things, it's really hard for them to be supportive, because they have a picture in their mind of somebody that they don't like, because all they see is how they've hurt you.
Yes, I would wholeheartedly agree. I had that happen with a friend of mine where at some point I had to ask, so why are you guys together? Because literally the only time you talk about him is when you're venting about what stupid thing happened or something that went wrong, where you're frustrated and you're upset and you're angry. And I get that. And I want to be that safe space, but I don't ever hear any of the good stuff that he does. And apparently he must, because you're still with him. But to remember to temper that with like, you know, saying something like, I just need to vent about this, and then let it be that space. But also remember, yeah, if I'm getting a steady diet of what a jerk he is, then there's no way in heck that I'm going to say, yeah, you should stay with this guy. How can I be happy when something good happens? Because I've only heard every single thing that he's done wrong in the last 6 months. So,
right. So if you want to make that transition and meeting your friends and family easier, that is some food for thought. And maybe we should do a separate episode where we kind of talk about that and dig into that a little bit. But really, that makes it a lot easier to introduce your significant other to your friends and family, for there to be warm and welcoming vibes from everybody, and for everybody to be cohesive, and for your support system to be able to effectively support you in the relationship all the way around.
I'm just kind of thinking too, maybe the easiest way to do that is to, you know, post something on Facebook. Maybe that's a good way to kind of get that ball rolling if both parties are comfortable, because, you know, maybe that aunt that you only see twice a year will see something like that. So there are ways to start to introduce these special people into our lives. It doesn't necessarily require them to show up at something, but, you know, finding those ways as you're both ready as a couple to start to weave those lives together, hopefully leads to something more fun and more lasting for you.
Yes. Yes. I love it. So drop us a line. Let us know how you have been able to introduce your significant other to your friends and family. Or if you have questions, shoot us an email and we can speak to any specifics and help you navigate through that, or at least give our our best opinion on that, do some research for you if needed to help you navigate that. Our email address is soyou'readytodate@gmail.com, and we will leave it in the show notes for you.
Again, thanks again for popping on and joining us, and we'll talk to you all next week.
Bye.